Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I'm sharing with you some of the books that I have hauled this year, specifically those starting with the letter G and H. So I actually don't have a ton of books that I have hauled this year that start with those letters. There's also not a ton of books that are written that I read that start with those letters, so whatever. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start with those books that start with the letter G just because that's what I grabbed first. They are coming off the shelves. This one, and one you can't see. Those are where these books are from. The other books that you see on those shelves are books that I've hauled previous to this year. So the first book that I'm going to share is The Glass Hotel. This is by Emily St. John Mandel, who is also the author of Station 11, which was the first book that I read by her. And I really enjoyed that book. And I'm trying to see if there's a glare on this book. And maybe there's a little bit of one, but it also is actually just later on that side of the book. Anyway, I really enjoyed Station 11, though it was a lot darker and heavier than I thought it would be, and I realize I don't always like that. This book is similar and yet different, I have heard. I believe it takes place in the same world as Station 11, which makes sense because that's just our universe on Earth in Canada. So I don't know, and the US, I think. So I don't know why this would be any different. This book takes place in Vancouver, and like Station 11, I understand is supposed to be a set of interconnected stories that follows the lives of people who have had their lives sort of turned upside down by a failed Ponzi scheme and a disappearance of a boat. That is my understanding of what this book is about. I don't know how correct that is because I obviously haven't read it yet, but I am looking forward to trying some more of Emily St. John Mandel. She does have a really good writing style, and let me read the opening to you and see if we find that right off the bat. And wasn't aware that this was the formatting. I don't know if those are supposed to be chapters, sections. I have no idea what's happening here. But chapter 1 says Vincent in the Ocean, December 2018. And then the number 1, begin at the end, plummeting down the side of the ship in storm's wild darkness. Breath gone with the shock of falling, my camera flying away through the rain. So I guess we start at the end where somebody's falling off the disappeared ship. I have no clue. I'm sure if I read it, it'll make more sense. Next, I have A Game of Hide and Seek. This is a book by Elizabeth Taylor, who was an English novelist, not the film actor that I always think of when I hear that name. And this is a book that is a New York Review book, and I hauled because I either got it for free or for less than $1 at a library sale, something like that. That sounds familiar to me. Or no, I bought it at the used bookstore that I used to live near, my favorite used bookstore. In fact, I think I bought it when I went back there because it was really cheap. No, this is the one that when I was sale. It doesn't matter where I bought the book. I bought it this year. That's all that matters to you guys. And even that doesn't matter to you. You just want to know what this book is about. A Game of Hide and Seek is about two characters, Vesey and Harriet. And they fell in love as teenagers. That's when their romance began. And then over the course of time, they just ended up going their separate ways. They are now into their adult lives. Vesey ends up coming back into the area where I believe they grew up. And they realize that, they both cherished that relationship they had as teenagers. And now they have to reconcile their feelings with what's actually going on in their lives today. And so I just love the idea of teenagers that had like a great teen romance coming back together as adults and trying to figure that out, especially when one of them is not necessarily available for love. So I really enjoy most of the books that I read by New York Review Books, and I'm hoping that this will be like sort of a hidden gem because I've never heard of this book before, but I do like the premise and the setup. And it begins, sometimes in the long summer evenings, which are so marked a part of our youth, Harriet and Vesey played hide and seek with the younger children, running across the tufted meadows, their shoes yellow with the pollen of buttercups. Ooh, I like the word buttercups in there. I don't know why. But I love that right off the bat, we also get the title name with, them growing up playing hide and seek together. So it definitely sounds like they knew each other, like even as children before they had a romance as teenagers. Ooh, lifelong love, soulmates? I guess we'll find out. The next book I have is Gilgamesh, written by Emily H. Wilson. To distinguish her from Emily Wilson, who writes a lot of Greek mythology, they're different people. Anyway, this Emily Wilson wrote Gilgamesh, which is the second book in the Sumerian trilogy, which is a fantasy mythic retelling of ancient Mesopotamian myths, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it was actually the book Gilgamesh that I found and bought first, and then kind of went out of my way to find the first book in the series because I didn't want to just skip on. But I loved the idea of a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest or one of the oldest stories that we have, mythological stories. I read the Epic of Gilgamesh. It must have for sure been in college, and I'm definitely looking forward to giving it another shot. I like the idea of being able to give it a shot as like a mythical fantasy retelling, which is probably the only type of fantasy I'm particularly interested in reading at this point. And if you don't know about the Epic of Gilgamesh, as it describes on the back here and talks about it, Gilgamesh is soon to be crowned king of Uruk, and he travels north to find his homelands in flames and his family on the run. And a blood red moon brings warnings of a new kind of war, and in the far north, and the enemies of Sumer are massing. Now, I haven't read Gilgamesh in such a long time that I don't know like how much of a retelling this is going to be. So I did do myself the favor of hauling Gilgamesh. So this doesn't say the Epic of Gilgamesh, but this is actually the Epic of Gilgamesh, and this is translated by Stephen Mitchell. And I did want a modern, updated language edition of the book because, I don't know, I feel like my recollection of the Epic of Gilgamesh was whatever translation I read it in before did not make it any easier to read. And it is in verse, so I wanted to make it as straightforward for myself as possible. And I also liked the way this was printed on the book. So I guess I will start by reading to you first from Gilgamesh itself, and then we'll read the opening of the retelling of Gilgamesh. He had seen everything, had experienced all emotions, from exhalation to despair, had been granted a vision into the great mystery, the secret places, the primeval days before the flood. He had journeyed to the edge of the world and made his way back, exhausted but whole. I'm already liking that. So yeah, I'm excited about that. And then let's see how Emily Wilson opens this. Is that a mistake? Because I'm thinking this is book 2. I'm going to assume that in the first sentence, it's not going to ruin anything. I'll read it out loud, and if it doesn't ruin anything, it'll stay in this video. If not, I'll cut to letting you know that it was a spoiler. It says, "We rode north through ice-clad forest, our hoods pulled low against the driving hail." Well, that doesn't tell us anything yet, does it? But it does give us a tiny taste of her writing style. And I feel like both do communicate that, like, he's coming back from somewhere, assuming that he's coming back north to head home. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this, and I love that image on the cover. So that was it that I have for the letter G. Let me get into the letter H, and I just have a handful of a few other books that I hauled. And the first one I'm going to discuss is Haroun in the Sea of Stories. This is, I believe, a short story collection. No, that may not be true. I think the name implies that it's a short story collection, but it's actually a novel by Salman Rushdie. And I have a couple of works by Salman Rushdie that I want to get to, and I've read one of his books before. His writing style doesn't always work for me, but I have heard a lot of really good things about this book. So I'm thinking that this is probably where I'm going to start with reading him. And this book specifically is a fantasy adventure about a 12-year-old boy who journeys to a magical world to restore his father's storytelling gift. If you're wondering what I'm reading from my phone. Like, this is not what I am saying about this book. This is what Goodreads says about this book. Anyway, the 12-year-old boy, he journeys to a magical world to restore his father's storytelling gift, which has been poisoned by a villain, which I think is such an interesting and sort of fanciful plot for a book, which is very like on point for Salman Rushdie's work. It has magical realism in it, which just about all of his books do. In fact, I think all of his books do in some way or another. Apparently, the storytelling style is sort of fable-like in the way it's told. And the themes cover things like censorship, storytelling, and societal problems, which are all things that I really like in books, like societal conflict, storytelling, censorship. So it's also not particularly long, so I'm pretty hopeful that this will really get me used to his writing style, and I'll be able to continue on with his works from there. Next, I have The Human Stain, which tells the story of a classics professor who ends up being forced to retire after he's accused of racism. And I feel like with everything that's going on in universities at this point, this is a book that I would like to reread. I believe the first time I read it based on the publication date, was probably in college, and I remember nothing about this book. And so I really want to read it again. And I just realized I'm not sharing with you the opening of these books. So let me start with this one. But I really am looking forward to rereading this and just seeing like if there's parallels and that kind of thing to some of what's happening today. Chapter one opens. It was in the summer of 1998 that my neighbor, Coleman Silk, who before retiring 2 years earlier had been a classics professor at nearby Athena College for some 20 odd years, as well as serving for 16 more as the dean of faculty, confided to me that at the age of 71, he was having an affair with a 34-year-old cleaning woman who worked down at the college. That was quite the sentence. I'm going back to Haroun and Sea of Stories to give you the opening of that. It opens, there was once in the country of Alif Bay a sad city, the saddest of cities, a city so ruinously sad that it had forgotten its name. It stood by a mournful sea full of glumfish, which were so miserable to eat that they made people belch with melancholy, even though the skies were blue. I really like the way that opens. And it oddly reminds me of a strange combination between Dr. Seuss and the opening of Strange the Dreamer, where like there's a city of sadness, but then like the names of the people remind me and the fish, like hopefully that made sense. The next book I have is Herself Surprised by Joyce Carey. I think this is the most recent buy in this little stack of H books. And this is a book that I actually found out about because it's in a series and it's the second book that I really want to read. Do I recall why I want to read the second book anymore? No, but it's on my list of things to get to. But I'm trying to learn my lesson of buying a first book in a series and reading that and deciding if I like it before buying other random books in the series. Go me. This book, specifically Herself Surprised, is about Sarah, who is looking back at her life from a prison cell, which already intrigues me. I want to know how and why she's in prison. And apparently, throughout the book, she introduces us to an interesting cast of characters. And she is described as an irrepressible, sexually magnetic woman, at once manipulated and generous to a fault. So, manipulated into prison, but generous, and it kind of gives me Maul Flanders vibes if you, for some reason, have read that book. And let's see how this opens. Chapter 1. The judge, when he sent me to prison, said that I behaved like a woman without any moral sense. I noticed, he said, and the paper printed it all, that several times during the gravest revelations of her own frauds and ingratitude, Mrs. Munday smiled. She may be ill-educated, as the defense has urged, but she is certainly intelligent. I am forced to conclude that she is another unhappy example of that laxity and contempt for all religious principle and social obligation which threatens to undermine the whole fabric of our society, or I'm sorry, civilization. Because it's always civilization that's at threat by immoral women. This definitely gives me vibes of Maul Flanders, which, if you haven't read, is about a morally lax woman living her best life, told in the first person, unreliable narrator. I'm hoping this is like sort of a modernish retelling. Now, this is not a recently published book. I think this is republished. Yeah, this was republished in 2021, but was originally written in 1941. So I am looking forward to this even more. On a totally different note and vibe from all the other books here, I also picked up The Husbands. I was book shopping at one point earlier this year, and I just wanted something like light and funny and weird. I'm really thinking this is going to deliver. This is about Lauren, who returns home to her flat in London late one night, and she's greeted at the door by her husband, Michael. Except Lauren's not married, so she's really not sure who this person is. And then the next day she wakes up and a different guy comes down from her attic, also claiming to somehow be her husband, because overnight, I think the first guy, Michael, goes back up into her attic. And I believe, if I'm correct, every day a different guy comes down from her attic claiming to be her husband. And at the end of each day, they go back up in. And like sometimes that's a good thing. I'm guessing sometimes it's a bad thing. She's got to figure it out. But there's also some weird time loopy thing happening where like it's not just changing her marital relationship inside her house, depending on who the husband is changing her whole life, like maybe the neighborhood she lives in and what her neighbors think. So she's trying to figure out how to figure out what is happening, if she wants to keep one of these men, if she'd like to just keep sending them back. And like sometimes the husband she likes doesn't lead to the life she likes. It sounds really fascinating and quirky and weird, and I'm hoping a bit funny. How could that not be funny? So we'll see. The man is tall and has dark tousled hair, and when she gets back quite late from Elena's Hindu, she finds him waiting on the landing at the top of the stairs. Tall, dark, and handsome. Okay, the next book I have comes with a trigger warning, so if you have any issues surrounding books about people unaliving themselves, I would just skip to the end of this video. This is the last book that I am going to share. That book is Ha, and this is described as documentary fiction in the tradition of In Cold Blood and the Executioner's Song. So it is a work of fiction, but it is told in a documentary style and is based on real life. So it's complicated. It's a complicated book. It's a thick, huge book, and you can see that the formatting is really unique and different. And there's a letter in here. Is there actually? There's an actual letter in here. I didn't know that. That's cool. Anyway, I'm going to read the back as best that I can. I already told you that this book is about someone who unalives themselves, so I will be self-censoring to prevent YouTube from further censoring what I have to say. On March 15th, 1977, with his wife's consent, celebrated writer and former terrorist Hubert Aquin unalived himself on the grounds of a Montreal convent school. Shocked by this act, a filmmaker friend feels compelled to understand why he did this and discovers at the heart of the tragedy an unforgettable love story. Ha reinvents the audiovisual revolution of the last century, interweaving photographs, documents, and images with testimony from Aquin's friends and contemporaries, Aquin himself, and the writers and artists who influenced him. This intriguing novel takes the reader on a Joycean tour of Metropolis in the midst of political and cultural turmoil. So I have heard good things about this book. If you're willing and able to make your way through it, it's definitely one that is going to come with a lot of trigger warnings, and I will be interested to see how it goes. I do tend to like books that have interesting formatting of different media brought into them. I like some ergothic fiction. I have read The Executioner's Song, and I did think that was a really fascinating book and do plan on rereading it at some point in my life. But this is the next work like that I will likely pick up. All right, so well, I guess I can't really show you the whole stack of books because I don't have all of them here, but here are all the books that start with the letter H that I have to show you. And I am definitely looking forward to reading each and every one of these, as well as the ones whose title starts with G that I shared at the beginning of the video. Let me know if you've read any of these books and if you think I should start any of them sooner than later, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!